What is up, guys, and welcome to today's episode of the New to the Game podcast. I am here with Chris. Chris, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. How are you doing this morning?
I am thriving. Uh, guys, today we're going to be talking about a topic that I love this topic, and it is going to be vision. You probably remember the last episode that we did where we talked a little bit more tactically about kind of the things that lead into vision and establishing your business, how to choose a business, what business industry maybe you should find yourself within. And this one is married together with it really nicely, but it's a little bit bigger picture. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why vision for a company is extremely important, and almost vision more so for yourself is extremely important, especially as you're establishing a company. We'll talk a little bit about some of the kind of the key points in building the vision and things that you should really consider, but then also we're going to address a lot of the common mistakes that we've known or that we've experienced ourselves when trying to build a vision. So when talking about a vision, it is exactly as you might think it. It is like the big picture. It is the view of yourself or your company or where your position is in the future. Some people, you've probably heard stories of the people that are like super, super granular with it. And they go like, okay, I'm going to have this type of house. This is like the paint color of the house. And this is what the cabinets are going to look like because they're really, really big into that like manifestation of all of that. We're not necessarily going to go so hard in that direction, but we are going to talk about why it is really important to be able to actually determine where you might want to be. What is the reason that you're doing this endeavor? Like, you've probably heard like the whole like start with why, like identify why you're here in the first place and why you're doing this. And that's really what goes hand in hand with vision. Because again, most of us, if you're like any young person nowadays that's wanting to start a business, there might be a lot of ambition behind it. Others, it's more out of just pure absolute desperation because you can't find work, or you just got laid off of your job and you're trying to find a good solution. Or maybe it's because you've been prodded on by a bunch of people and they're like, oh man, you should totally start a business and blah 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 blah. Vision is critical to have it be your own, because at the end of the day, if you are on a mission, if you are doing something and you are headed in a direction with some kind of picture or goal in mind, if you do not have the ability to be able to really truly articulate what that is, what so easily tends to happen is that you find yourself in a place where you are extremely and very easily influenced by whatever anyone else tells you. That falls in the business influencer circle, that falls in the circle of not really being able to make good quality decisions within your company because you're not really sure what you're making the decision for. You're just kind of looking at maybe, okay, I'm just going to build a healthy business. Not that that's a bad thing, but why are you building the business in the way that you want to? Some people say, I want to build my business because I want to scale to the moon and I want to make multiple millions of dollars, and they're building their company in a way that doesn't really align with that because they're still operating like a single man shop that's not really establishing a bunch of systems to be able to like actually scale that and hire people and to build the necessary framework for a company to be built to that size. Other people are literally just trying to earn six figures in a year, and that's like a lifelong goal for them. I guess nowadays it's more like a little bit more than that to actually survive, but let's be honest, to try and build a company that is with every effort to make it just something that you can earn a reasonably good living off of and be able to do the type of work that you love, it's very easy to slip into the opposite mindset, which is like, oh, I need to systematize everything, I need to like get the right CRM in place, and I need to take care of all of these like very meticulous logistical foundational pieces of my company,
Mhm.
when that can actually sometimes interrupt your ability to build a more simple type of company that doesn't
Mhm.
demand all of that heavy duty structure. So it's really critical for the vision to belong to you. It is the picture of, I mean, for me, like my personal vision, I'm not trying to make necessarily millions of dollars. I mean, it could very well be that I build healthy enough companies where that happens, but my vision is probably smaller than that compared to a lot of people. My vision is a little bit more focused on earning in that probably $200 to $400,000 a year range and being able to make a
Mhm.
great living for my family, but also really be able to live as simple of a life as possible. I'm not trying to be the massive CEO of 10 companies. I'm not trying to have an organization that's 100 people strong. It's just not really in line with the type of person that I want to be right now. So other people will have different visions, and it's really important to be able to talk about that. So, Chris, I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this, because I know that you've been a person, you have a vision board. You've talked a lot in your past about kind of that life that you're working to be able to create as you've started your business. So how would you describe your approach to establishing your vision as you've seen it, and just as kind of, again, more in line with the way that you approach this?
Yeah, absolutely. So the hardest thing for me is when I sit down and I think about this, it's so easy to get completely overwhelmed by where you want to be in a year or 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. And it's simultaneously important to look at where you want to be in 10 years, 20 years, later down the road, later in life. But at the same time, at the end of the day, what you need to know is what you want to do today or tomorrow or next week or in the next 2 weeks. So what I've always done is I always try to keep in my head and on paper and on a vision board where I see myself in the future and how that breaks down piece by piece by piece to what I need to do today. Because as someone that struggles with, like, all of us have had those days where you work for 6, 8, 10, 12 hours and you feel like you didn't get anything done. So what I've tried to do is break down my vision and my goals all the way down to the granular tasks of what do I need to do today. So what that looks like for me is if I say, hey, in 5 years, I want my company to make X amount of dollars. I want to have this many employees. I want to have this many trucks. I want to have this many people, and I want to be making X amount of dollars. What does that look like in annual revenue? What does that look like in monthly revenue? How many jobs would I have to be selling or doing or completing or producing to get to that? And what do I have to do now to get to that point? So, to give you a good example, in my company, I'd really like to be at a point where my top crew leads are making 6 figures plus, and I can retain and keep and have winning level employees. And I need to make sure that if that's happening, that they have enough work, they have enough jobs that we're profitable enough to pay their salaries. So I have to look at, okay, break that down into those employees making this much money equals the company making this much money equals selling this much work equals having this many total crews on the road. And what do I need to do today to make that happen? So one of the mistakes I made in my old company was not building systems that support the goals that I wanted. So I had those big, huge, long-term, big picture goals, but a lot of the things I was doing day to day were more about survival than where I wanted to be in 5 years. And I spent so much time focusing on the now that I forgot what I wanted in the future. Or I spent so much time thinking about the future and trying to build those plans for 5 years down the road that what was happening day to day, affecting today and next week, slipped up. So when I start talking about vision and goals and where I want to be in a few years, I think it's important to remember that you have to set goals for where you want to be and where you want to go and what you want to do, but you have to make them in a way that allows you to break them down into bite-sized pieces that you can accomplish now. I mean, it's like the age-old quote, like running a marathon starts with taking the first step. Making $1 million starts with making the first $10 in the first sale. And it's hard because you want to set goals and have a vision that is accurate to where you want to be, but it also has to be attainable. And that's definitely a hard dichotomy sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love that approach, because it's just, I don't know, it allows you to make it as real as possible today. Because I mean,
Hmm.
it's vision can sometimes be ambiguous. Sometimes it's actually helpful to have it be a little bit ambiguous, but to be able to say, okay, this
Hmm.
is actually where I want to be. So how can I make sure that today I'm actually walking in that direction? Like, am I actually, if I want to run a marathon and I'm in the marathon, am I actually making sure that I'm like lined up in the correct race with the correct grouping of people? Or am I with the group of
Hmm.
people that's supposed to be running an ultra or maybe a 5K? And
Yeah.
so like being able to make sure you're in that place is really critical, because yeah, I mean, You're trying to
Yeah.
build a company with like much bigger picture goals, then it will not, and I'm not going to say that in your early years of business it's going to like have a radical impact on the way that you approach building the
Hmm.
foundational building blocks of your company. I mean, we're all about that here, and it's not necessarily going to impact that so much, but it is going to impact. I mean, sometimes like how aggressive are you hoping to be in your growth of your business? Like if your vision is that, are you hoping for your vision to be attained in 5 years? Are you content with it being 10 years, or are you
Hmm.
really really wanting to accelerate this process and be that guy that's been able to achieve it in 2 years? Another thing that I think is really really important for me is being able to, this is I would put this in the common mistakes section, but basically being able to, I guess I wrote it as like disregarding the impact your vision may have on your family. What I would almost sort of rephrase that into, because that's a massive part and that's a subject in itself sort of, but it's also like
Yeah.
being bold enough to be able to count the cost of your vision. Like, what is
Hmm.
your vision going to take to be able to achieve? I think it's really easy to leave that ambiguous vision and to kind of just leave it far out there. But then when you start to, as Chris described, like, I mean, basically going from, okay, but let's say I have 10 big picture steps, maybe 10 years, maybe 10 quarters to be able to achieve this vision. What does quarter 10 look like? What does quarter 9 look like? What does quarter 8 look like? And then kind of working your way down from there. And it really impacts the way that you have those decisions made within your company. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I see so much of that where people have the big vision, but they really haven't taken the time to try and actually think about what it's going to take out of them to be able to get there, and it leaves what's could be a maybe healthy vision, but they, because they approached it in a way without being mindful or thoughtful of how they got there in the first place, it leads to oftentimes a very distorted approach to how they should tactically step
Hmm.
into their business.
Well, and I know one of the things you and I talked about when we were kind of formatting this episode and talking about the different things we wanted kind of to cover is there's so much content out there on the internet, online, in the entrepreneurship space of like, hey, you do XYZ, you'll make $3 million in 6 months. Or you do this, this, and this, and your company will triple in size in 90 days. Or just all these like catchy, like money making ideas that like you were talking about, like making your vision your own. And I think there's two parts of that that are commonly forgotten, which is one, you have to set goals big enough that they scare you a little bit. Because if you set goals too low and you hit them, but you know you could have done more, that's going to mess with your head. But at the same time, if you
Yeah,
set them so big that they're realistically unattainable, that's also going to mess with your head. So you have to take a look at the possibilities, the data, the realism, or like how realistic your goals actually are, and set goals that are big and that scare you a little bit, and that your family kind of looks at you and they're like, man, are you serious? Are you sure? But that you actually have somewhat of a chance of making. Because if you set these goals that are so big that you can't get there realistically, then you're just going to spend a lot of time spinning your wheels and shooting for the moon and end up not making it.
yeah,
And then that second part that we were talking about is like, if you if you set goals that are super huge, how they impact your family, the people around you, the time that you have to set towards them, that's going to be huge too. I mean, if you want to make $10 million and you want to work 80 hours a week and you want to grow a company in the first 3 years to where you're making an absolute crap load of money, that's awesome. But if you have a wife, 3 kids, and a day job, and you're trying to do this as a side hustle, that might not be realistic.
yeah,
So it's you've got to look at your whole life, the picture of where you're at, and what you want to do, and really kind of stop to consider what is a big enough goal that it really motivates you to get there, but is realistic enough based on data, based on your situation, based on where you're at, that you have a really good chance of actually getting there. So to like
yeah,
give you a number, like a good example, like if you look at your business numbers today and you say, "Hey, I can do 500,000 this year." But if I do this, and this, I can do 800 next year. Then setting the goal for 800 is uber realistic. Pushing it to a million and saying, hey, I'd really like to do a million next year is a goal that is reasonably attainable, but is a stretch. Like you want to have a stretch goal of where like, man, if I could do this, that would be amazing. But it's also possible. If you look at that same number and you say, I want to do $3 million next year, it's probably not going to happen. And you're going to spend a lot of time being sad that you couldn't get to your goal because you set your goal so much higher than is realistic for your current situation that you're going to end up frustrated.
Yeah. And I mean, it just reminds me, I think about so much of the content that we've created already, and I feel like both you and I share this similar thought path, I guess, as far as it is a perspective that we both have experienced. We have been around hundreds. We actually have been around hundreds of people that have walked through these processes. And what we have seen is just this overwhelming tendency towards, I guess, a lack of self-awareness to where they actually are and what they actually could do. And it's not like, again, we just get lost in the hype. I mean, we really do. We get lost in the hype or we get lost in the fear. It's one or the other. The fear tells us that we can't achieve any of these things and that we should always, like, we shoot for the floor. And the hype tells us that we have to shoot for the stars. And it's just like, you don't have to like live by those influences. When you really start to be able to actually take the time, be self-aware enough, do an audit of your time, do an audit of your effort, like it really helps, and it makes a really big difference. I mean, everything that we've talked about, from KPIs, from marketing strategies, from the number of leads that you need to generate, to the closing ratio that you need to have, to the number of sales dollars that you need to have, you can very realistically deconstruct all of that information if you are able to originate it all from the big picture, the vision. So on a few key points that we highlighted here, is it scalable to the degree that you want? Now, this point is one that I would say you could get carried away with, or you could be super restricted by. Some businesses aren't like they're scalable. I never want to put a business in a box that's like it's just not scalable. But again, if you're in a niche or you're in a smaller service realm or whatever it may be, it's possible that your business may not be as immediately scalable. It may not be the business that you can rapidly take from, I don't know, 0 to 5 or 7 million by year 5. Like some businesses are going to take a little bit longer than that. And that's okay, but it's important to be able to just say, okay, is this actually scalable? If for whatever reason I get to a point in life where I have more availability, my family is growing, and I want to be able to make more money, or maybe I want to get to a place of more simplicity with my life. Like, is this business going to be able to get me there? And is my vision pliable enough, at least, for me to be able to say, okay, maybe it could scale if I decide that my vision may change, but it doesn't have to if I don't want it to. And I feel like that's a really, really important area.
Yeah. Yeah. So question for you about that, Ben. So like when you talk about scalability, we had a whole episode on picking your service. And how important do you feel like it is when you're picking your service to determine this in advance? I mean, you and I both know that every service is not as scalable as another. Some businesses
Sure.
allow you to essentially get started and you can train somebody to replace you almost immediately, and some are not. I mean, obviously you have to have a certain amount of flexibility in this when you are growing over the years, but do you feel like the scalability of a company is a big enough factor that should almost affect how people choose and start what service they want to offer?
Wouldn't feel overly restricted by it because the service offering is, in my opinion, something that's pliable. Now, you could be
Mhm.
like me and start a company with literally the only service that you can offer in the name of the company. But I know that like you can rebrand a company, you can pivot, you can change.
Mhm.
So don't feel like you have to be married to one thing. But it's a helpful consideration. I think it's just about the self-awareness. Ask yourself the question, but don't put all your eggs in that basket necessarily either.
Okay. Yeah, and the one of the things I always think about when I kind of talk about this too is like when you're setting up your company, setting your goals, and you're looking at your business, there's kind of a twofold part to this point, but how easy it is to train people or employees to replace you in the future And by replace you, I mean replace you in the field doing the actual service, replace you in the office doing the office work. And what that ties into is our next point, which is, do you want a job that you own or a business? And what I mean by that, for those of you guys that have never heard that kind of terminology before, there's really two types of businesses out there. There are self-employed people and there are companies. And I feel like there's a really common thing that you and I see all the time where somebody's like, "Oh yeah, I have a business." And what they really have is a job that they own. And what that looks like is, I don't know, you're a drywall guy and you were working for a drywall company. You started off on your own and now you are a dude in a drywall van. You got a logo, you got a brand, and you're doing drywall jobs, but you don't have any employees. So at the end of the day, you are both doing the work in the field, you are doing the office work, you're sending out estimates, you're sending out leads, sorry, taking in leads. And at the end of the day, until you train somebody to replace you in one of those capacities, what you really have is a job, not a company. And all of us have been there. I mean, Ben, I know you've gone out and you've laid plenty of lawns, and I know that I've built plenty of decks and cleaned plenty of roofs. But at the end of the day, we're both at a point now where we predominantly run our business and have people doing the majority of the work in the field. So when you're thinking about your vision for the future, factoring in how simple, easy, straightforward it is to either find somebody or train somebody to do one or multiple portions of your job can have such a profound impact on where you're going to be in the future. Obviously, if you're an electrician and you can't just pick somebody up and train them to do your job in a few months, that makes it harder to replace that position than, for example, my business where like I do predominantly exterior maintenance and cleaning. So I can actually feasibly train an employee to do most of the main services we offer in 3 to 6 months. So if I can find somebody who's 20 something years old, strong back, not afraid of heights, and is honest, reliable, shows up to work, that employee can theoretically replace the majority of my field work in 6 months. If you're an electrician, that might take 4 or 5 years. So that's something to consider too. When you're thinking about this though, Ben, how would you like explain this to somebody who has just started a company, they're doing all the work in the field, and they're trying to decide what capacity or what portion of their job they want to pass on to somebody else? Like, how would you suggest somebody think about this?
I think it's obviously there's not one singular way to approach it, but it is helpful to start asking yourself the question of like, generally speaking, to be able to have your finger on the pulse of the company is a really helpful starting place. Now, that can be your financials, that could be the KPIs that you have. Those are typically the more measurable
Mm-hmm.
things, but it also could be like interactions with customers or client experiences suffering. Are you losing a lot of sales for some reason? Or are you not being able to follow up with people rapidly enough and you're losing a lot of business as a result of it? That could be a factor that means you probably need to invest a little bit more time in the sales role, or maybe you need to
Mm-hmm.
invest a little bit more time on your branding and your marketing and plan your week around that. Like, where are the pain points in your business and start to figure out ways that you might be able to
Mm-hmm.
solve those, because you're not just a single contractor that's out there doing the work, and like you're not a laborer. There's more to that.
Mm-hmm.
You are a business owner, and there's responsibilities you have as a business owner to make sure that you are being a good steward of this business that you have. So, yeah, I mean, look at the areas of your business that are probably struggling the most by lack of touch. So essentially, it's areas that
Mm-hmm.
are maybe getting neglected the most. Um, Again, if you're out there and you're a laborer all day long every day, but then you're really stressed out because you have no work on your schedule, maybe it's time to go ahead and say, okay, I'm going to work in the field 4 days a week. And then I'm going to dedicate my Fridays to sales and follow ups and being really diligent on building a more thorough sales process for myself. That's not like the very early stages. So And then as you grow and as you scale, I mean, like, I could personally right now, I'm in a position where I look at my schedule and I see that I run 4 or 5 sales appointments a day, and it can often pull me out of the office, so much so that I don't have much great ability to kind of get into the zone, into the place that I need to be in to be able to
Hmm.
do the CEO management stuff that I have to do. So pretty realistically, I need to either have a conversation about how can I automate or simplify some of the CEO stuff that I have to do, or how do I find someone to help me offload a little bit of my sales
Hmm.
responsibilities or streamline that process a little bit further. So yeah, it's about having your finger on the pulse of the company and being able to make educated decisions based upon that, as far as where you need to be best fitting yourself into the role that needs it the most.
Yeah. I think one thing I want to add, one thing I want to add to this as well is one of the important things to consider is what roles in your day to day as a business owner are easily delegatable and which ones aren't, and which ones are making the company more money, which ones aren't, which ones are more challenging and difficult to outsource, and which ones aren't. It's one of the reasons why when we talked about KPIs, I know Ben mentioned like one of the simplest and easiest decisions you can make when you first start a company is hiring a bookkeeper. Because if you are spending 10, 15, 20 hours a week doing a job that most bookkeepers can do for 20, $30 an hour, like categorizing transactions or inputting data or cataloging receipts, is that really a good use of your time when you could be theoretically either in the field making $50 to $100 an hour or in the office doing your CEO job that is theoretically worth $100 to $200 an hour? And every role in your company has a dollar amount. And when you're a new business owner and you're looking at this big picture and the long term of where you want to be, it's hard to do when you're wearing so many hats. But you have to remember that there are tasks that you do as a business owner that you could pay somebody $20 an hour to do, and there are tasks that you have as a business owner that you cannot pay somebody $20 an hour to do. So you might have 4 different jobs in your company, and one of those jobs might be a $20 an hour job, and one of those jobs might be a $50 an hour job, and one of those jobs might be $100+ an hour job. And in the grand scheme of your vision, your goals, and where you want to see your company in the future, picking those things that are higher level, high priority tasks and outsourcing or hiring or delegating those lower priority tasks can have such an impact on your ability to be more efficient and productive at those $100+ an hour tasks. And
Yeah.
obviously, as a new business owner, when you're just starting out, you're a 20-something-year-old that bought a pressure washer, put it in the bed of their pickup truck, and bought a squeegee and an applicator, and you're out there cleaning windows and pressure washing driveways. You're not making enough money to hire a $80,000 a year office manager to answer the phone when somebody calls 2 or 3 times a day. So obviously, there's some realisticness to this that has to be factored in. But when you get to the point where, like Ben's talking about, where Ben's got a CEO job and a sales job, and that sales job takes him out of the office so much, it's something to look at. Like, do you have enough revenue or time or ability or cost to hire a sales guy? It might be yes, it might be no. Or if you're in my shoes, I have an enormous amount of office work that I'm trying to either hire or train somebody to do so that I have that 20 or 30 hours of answering the phone and sending emails and reviewing estimates and following up with people outsourced to somebody else so that I can be focusing on bigger priority tasks. Or maybe if you're still doing the 50-50, I'm in the field half the time, in the office half the time, maybe that's hiring one more field employee so that you're not in the field at all. And it's such a hard thing to sit down and look at because as a business owner, you want to do everything. um, Learning to look at the big picture of where you want to be and what delegation that's going to require is such a hard thing to do, especially when you're new. Because one of the hardest truths in business, I know you'll agree with this, Ben, is that you have to acknowledge at a certain point that nobody will ever do your job as well as you do in any capacity. What everything from answering the phone to selling jobs to physically doing the work, it's very hard to find another person that you truly feels like does anything as well as you do as the guy that has their name on the truck and on the door. And that's definitely a hard
Yep.
reality to acknowledge. Don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
you're going to find some rock star stellar employees out there, but expecting everybody to be a clone of the way you do things is a recipe for being disappointed and sad.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I will say, I mean, I have found people that are better at me than at, like, my project manager is much better at me than project management than I ever was. So like that
True.
there is some give and take there. But yeah, it is important just to be able to accept the fact that you might see a decrease in the quality of performance. Your KPIs might take
Mhm.
a hit in certain areas, but if it allows you to be more efficient, I mean, I would rather have two salespeople that sell 70% of what I'm able to sell, but now I'm selling
Mhm.
140% of what I was
Now the
selling
total is
before. So like that's a
140.
win. So being able to just, yeah.
Mhm.
What did I say? Did I say 140? Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
sorry.
with that being said,
You cut out for a second. Sorry.
did I? Oh, so with that being said,
Yeah.
I want to talk just, I'm going to address a few of the common mistakes. We've already just a couple of them, but I'm going to go ahead and high level highlight a few of them, and I'm going to kind of rapid fire our way through these. Um, and then just we'll close out the episode talking a little bit more about the importance of community in all of this as well. So, common mistake number 1, aiming for ease. If your entire motivation in life is to have an easy life and to sit on the beach and to not have to work anymore, that underlying motivation can very easily scream a characteristic of I'm it would be bold to say this, but almost a characteristic of laziness. It's like your desire is to be able to live a life where you can one day be lazy and be a bum. That
Mhm.
you have to be careful with that. I don't want to necessarily say that, like, yes, making good money is going to make your life easier, but to be able to be driven by the process as opposed to the just ultimate desire to have as much ease as possible, it can very quickly bleed into the way that you approach business. It can push you into being a person that makes bad decisions because you're hoping for the easy as rapidly as you possibly can get it, and it can really twist the way that you approach business. Again, I don't want to say that like it's a terrible evil thing to have a vision where like your life is easier at the end of it. We all do want that to some degree, but you have to be very careful down that route because it can get you into sketchy territory sometimes. The other point that sort of goes with that is trying to moralize your vision. I wrestled with this a lot. I mean, I'm a Christian guy,
Mhm.
and there's very, very easily influence for the principles that you believe as a Christian to bleed into the way that you approach your business, and that's a very healthy, good thing. I think you should be an ethically and value oriented person, and I believe that's a good way that I can steward my business well. However, it's very easy to treat your business like it's moral, and like it has to have a certain moral character to it, as if in the same way that you do, and it prevents you. It's almost like you're personifying your business. And when
Mhm.
you do that, it can make it extraordinarily difficult to make the necessary but very hard decisions that you have to make in business. Decisions that involve laying off people, letting go of people, firing people, making decisions that impact people's families. Knowing when you
Mhm.
need to be able to make a decision that says, okay, I'm going to declare bankruptcy because my business is not headed in the right direction, and being able to actually make that decision, knowing that it could lead to a bunch of people potentially being quote unquote screwed over by the impact of your company. And I
Mhm.
think we have to be very, very careful in how we approach that, because again, at the end of the day, when you try to moralize your business and personify your business, it can really inhibit your ability to make good quality decisions that are ethical, in my opinion, that are still hard because you allowed some voices typically in your head or surrounding you to influence the decisions that you made for the business that were actually meant to be made for the business in a healthy manner. So, Chris, you had written this one out, talking about the aiming small for fear of aiming big. I think we sort of touched on that a little bit. Was there anything else you'd want to really add to that point, though? Just talking simply about how you can aim too small or sometimes aim too big when it's influenced by fear.
No, I think we talked about this earlier. But what, like I was saying before, the hardest thing that you have to do is look at where you want to be and set goals that are a stretch. Because if you set goals that are too big, it's a recipe for being disappointed. If you set goals that are too small, it's a recipe for feeling like you had more in the tank and you didn't use it. It's
Yep.
just like my coach when I talk about running marathons or ultras or training for a half Ironman. One of the things he said to me before the last couple events I've completed was finish with nothing in the tank. Push yourself to the point where when you cross the finish line, however long that is, whether it's a 5K or a 50K, finish without anything in the tank. Because the one thing that you'll never regret finishing, but if you cross that finish line of a 5K or a 50K, whatever size of race you're doing, if you feel like you had more, it's a disappointment. Even if you finished it, you
Mm.
completed it, you crushed it, even if you beat your PR, but you had more, you're going to feel to a certain extent like you had more to give. And I think the same
Yeah.
thing applies when you're setting your goals. If you set a goal too big, I mean, if I go to a 50K and say, "Hey, I'm going to finish this in 3 hours," that's ludicrous. Nobody does that. Or if I say, "Hey, I'm going to start a business tomorrow and it's going to do $3 million by the end of the year," that's probably a stretch. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are companies that can do that, but in a home service company, saying I'm going to go from 0 to 3 million in 6 months is ludicrous for most companies. So take the time to set goals that are big and that make you a little bit nervous, put you on edge, but don't set them so small for fear of not completing them that you finish without feeling like you drained the tank and that you gave all you had and that you put the effort in that you wanted to.
Yeah. That's good. Um, the other two that we have here is we already sort of touched on disregard the impact your vision may have on your family. Be mindful you have people in your life that rely upon you. Don't create a
Mhm.
vision where they're left in the dust. I don't want to say that like, I mean, if it's your parents or your aunt and uncle, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the people that you are most responsible for. Don't leave them in the dust because they are relying upon you to be a present father, to be a present husband. Still
Mhm.
be a good steward in those areas and don't neglect them. Overly specifying. This one, I don't want to say this is a bad thing, but I think it can lead you down a route of over analyzing everything and you get that analysis paralysis where you really go too
Mhm.
deep into your vision and every decision is like, okay, if this doesn't happen, you become very fear motivated because it's like, if I don't make this decision now, then that's not going to happen in this way and it has to be laid out perfectly. Like, allow pliability to your vision because it needs to be able to recognize the actual fact that like there are factors that are outside of your control that you have to be willing to surrender and allow to influence your vision and impact your vision, but without harming the direction that you're going necessarily. So the last point, and Chris, I'll kind of let you wrap it up here, but talking just simply about why the people you surround yourself is critical to achieving your vision. You and I have both been in great circles where we've had really, really quality influences in our lives. We've also been in circles that weren't necessarily as great. So how would you summarize that, just talking in closing about why it is so important to be able to have people that can help you reinforce that vision?
Yeah. Man, that could be a whole episode in and of itself, of talking about why community and why coaches and why friends and why people that are walking the walk or shooting for what you want are so important. But what I would summarize it with two things. One is the classic quote of the people that you spend the most time around are who you become. So if you want to be a successful business owner, hang out with successful business owners. If you want to run marathons, hang out with people that run. If you want to build a home service company that is profitable and that isn't a giant drag and that turns your hair gray and puts you into a place of being sad and frustrated every day, hang out with people that are doing the same. And there's so many facets to this we could talk about, so many different points. But I think at the end of the day, one of the reasons you and I are doing this, Ben, is to have a community of people that are doing the same thing as us. People that are just starting, people that are wanting to grow, people that are wanting to get to a better place, people that want more. And surrounding yourself with those kind of people and people that are both ahead of you and going through what you're going through right now in the day to day is so important. I mean, you and I have a bunch of mutual friends that are doing this that we talk to on a regular basis. I mean, how many times per week do we talk to other guys that are doing the same things we are? I mean, for me, it's every day. And I think for both of
Every
us,
day.
it is. Yeah. And surrounding yourselves with people that have both been through similar struggles as you, are actively going through the same struggles as you, are working through the same issues, trying to solve the same problems, trying to have the same kind of growth, have similar goals and values, is just so, so, so important. Because if you don't have that, I mean, the way I would compare it to is if you're a runner and you want to run a marathon, but you spend every day hanging out with people that would rather play Call of Duty or go to the mall or go to the movies, you're probably going to feel less motivated to go on your run. Whereas if your friends are people that are also wanting to run a marathon and also wanting to train and also wanting to stay in shape, you're almost by default going to be more successful at reaching that goal. Just like if your goal is to grow a business or start a business or scale a business or build something for yourself and for your family, if you are surrounded by people doing the same, you are almost by default or by osmosis, or however you want to say it, going to accomplish that more readily. And that is the reason that we're doing what we're doing. We want to reach people, provide value, build a community of people that want the same thing as us. And to be able to provide value, to be able to build that community, and to get people around each other who are striving for the same goals and to build the same sort of things. And there's so much value in that. So much value.
Good.
Anything you want to add before we wrap this up?
I mean, that was well said.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for listening. If you made it this far, we appreciate you. If you want to hang out with us, talk to us, be part of the community we're building, we are on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube for our podcast at New to the Game. And we are on Facebook. We're on Instagram. Come find us. Come follow us. But most of all, where we are really trying to build this community and get people around each other is on Skool. If you're unfamiliar with Skool, it's a community kind of classroom format app / website where you can build communities around whatever you're interested in. We have a Skool community called New to the Game, and the link will be in the podcast show notes, the YouTube show notes, and you can find it on our Facebook and on our Instagram. We would love to have you. It is completely free. This is not some sales pitch. We are just trying to get you into our community to come hang out with us, learn with us, grow with us. We're posting content there pretty regularly. We're posting all these episodes so you can find them easily. But we're also building out courses, building out programs, and doing live calls on Zoom. Just a way to get people around each other that are building and growing the same way we are. And we would love to have you.